Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babiar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Anna Weinzapfel, and Anna and I actually met at a boot camp in Colorado Springs several months ago. Anna works with Missionary Training International, or MTI is what everybody calls them, MTI. And Anna, I do believe that you're joining me today from Colorado. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep. I'm here in Colorado, right above Colorado Springs, actually looking out the window at the snow on the mountains. It's beautiful here.
Wow. Well, I am not a huge fan of snow, but hey, if you can ski on it or you can do some other sort of sports on it, that kind of changes my mind. And at the time we're recording this, your snow is about to melt, but not quite yet, right?
Yeah, that's right. We just got done with our bomb cyclone, the blizzard. So there's still some drifts out there, but it's pretty much all gone. The Colorado sun is powerful.
Well, by the time some people hear this, because we're kind of planning this a month or two out, there's probably going to be someone listening to this on the beach going, what in the world? But anyway, well, you've been with MTI for how long now?
Almost 4 years.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your husband, your kind of how you ended up being where you are before we dig into our topic for the day.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, actually, this is great because my husband and I met through support raising.
Really?
I actually forgot. I forgot to tell you that. It's kind of a special topic to us both.
Sure.
When I first started about 4 years ago, thinking I was going to go into full-time ministry, working with missionary kids at Mission Training International. I knew that I was going to have to face my personal bogeyman, support raising. And I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have the privilege and the honor of attending SRS or even knowing that it existed at that point. So I was just really lost. And I just we didn't have any money for training or extra personnel to do that.
Okay.
So they just kind of were like, well, see what you can do. We're here for help if you need it.
Right.
And I just figured, oh, okay, I'm a missionary kid. How hard can this be? I don't watch my parents do this. This is going to be a breeze. Just going to start asking people for money. And I shared at a Bible study that I was starting to raise support, and I just was really nervous, and I didn't know what I was doing. And one of the guys came up to me, and he was from Navigators, and he said, oh, I actually know how to raise support. Can I help you? Can I help train you?
Wow.
Sure. And also, you're kind of cute. Sure, yeah. So we met at a coffee shop, and he brought me a binder of support raising materials, and he walked me through the whole binder, and I bought him lunch to thank him, and the rest was history. And now we've been married 2 years.
Man, I tell you what, that's about the best pickup line I've ever heard. I know how to raise support. Can I help you?
I know. I was like, oh, it's just like, oh, such a cheesy Christian missionary way to start dating. I was like, oh, I never thought this was going to happen to me. So support raising, I feared it so much, but it ended up blessing me in ways I never expected. I still have that binder.
Well, this is proof once again that we do not pre-rehearse these podcasts because I had not heard that story. So that's
You're
great.
welcome.
That's great. Well, again, welcome to the podcast, Anna. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, hey, I want to go back to when we first kind of met. And I say kind of met because even though we've had a couple of discussions, this might only be like number 3. So you and I are kind of strangers to each other still. And yet the reasons that I invited you on was, every now and then, Anna, there's like a moment in a boot camp that just kind of, I don't want to say it takes my breath away necessarily. That might be overstating it. And yet there's a very powerful thing going on where God's at work in a way that I can take no credit for. And I think you had a moment like that. I think God used you to usher in a moment like that when we were at the boot camp in Colorado Springs a few months back. And so rather than me trying to, completely unwrap that, let me just kind of kick that to you and have you explain a little bit about your history prior to that moment. And then I'll kind of share a little bit about what was being said, and then you can kind of share how you reacted. So tell us a little bit more about your childhood and your support raising experiences, and even some of the filters and thoughts and what we'll say baggage that you brought with you into that boot camp that day.
Yeah. Yeah, that was amazing. Thanks for bringing that up. That was a God moment for sure. So going back, let me see. I am a missionary kid, as I think I mentioned. I grew up in West Africa, traveling around different countries. We kind of ended up moving a lot, so that's why I always say West Africa.
Yeah.
My parents were missionaries with Muslim unreached people groups. And I moved there when I was about 6. And I don't remember the start of their support raising journey. I don't remember, that push right before you leave.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember, from when I was 6 until I came back to the States for college when I was 18.
Okay.
Support raising was a big part of our lives, and mainly every time we would come home to the States. And it's a huge part of most missionary kids' stories. A lot of missionary kids that I work with here at MTI, a lot of missionary kids that I know as friends who have shared their stories with me. So I do want to make sure, as I'm talking, in a weird way, I almost represent their stories, but also there are kids with much different stories from mine. And
Sure.
there are some of my friends had great experiences with support raising. Their family did it. They were really healthy. They had open communication, and others really, it was more of a negative part of their stories. So I just want to make sure I highlight that there's a spectrum.
Right.
So I don't represent.
If I can summarize what you just said, you might reflect a good portion of other MKs that are about your age. You're not speaking for everybody, and yet you're not abnormal as well.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that summary. Yeah, I just want to make sure I get that out there first.
Okay.
Before I launch into the impact that it had on me. For me, though, support raising was one of my least favorite parts of being a missionary kid.
Okay.
God does have a sense of humor, I think, and he did call me in the end to a ministry where I do now raise support, but I swore for the longest time that when I grew up, I'd get a real job. I would never raise support.
Right.
It just was really negative in my life. How it looked like in our family was every time we went back to the States for our furlough or our HMA, we would visit churches, and it felt many churches, but it also felt like, as a kid, like almost countless supporters' houses.
Sure.
And this was every 2 or 4 years when we'd come back. And it seemed like it was never ending. I saw my parents under stress. I knew it was mixed up in money from an early age. So that was also so. And I saw, obviously as a kid, any kid will see their parents stressed and or fighting about money. But that, as an oldest child, made a huge impact on me. And I kind of got the secondhand stress from that.
Okay.
I was always really relieved the few times my parents let us stay with our grandparents and we didn't have to go with them to a new church or to a new to a new person's house, which we might have visited 4 years previous, but I didn't remember them. They remembered me, but I was always in the position of, these are strangers.
Sure, sure. Let me ask you real quick. You have siblings,
Yeah, I do. I have one younger sister, four
right? Okay.
years younger than me.
Okay. And you said every 2 to 4 years you came
Yeah.
back to the United States and you did kind of
Mhm.
a support raising tour. It might have had a different name,
Mhm.
but it was a support raising tour.
Mhm.
Was there time of rest mixed in with that, or is it more just go, 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 see some family, but go, go, go?
That is a good question. I am grateful to my parents that there were times of rest
Oh, praise the Lord.
in there. that was a real blessing, and I think they really tried to do that as intentionally as they could
Hmm.
um, for themselves and for our family. And I hope anyone listening knows that I am not at all blaming my parents. I do not. I love them, and I want everyone to know that they definitely were doing their best with
Yeah.
the tools they had and what they knew at the time.
I want to interrupt this podcast for a brief heads up. This is Steve Shadrach, author of The God Ask. Support Raising Solutions is running a contest to win an SRS swag pack. Go check out our past podcast episode number 29 to get details on how you can get involved and possibly win some fun Support Raising Solutions swag, including a $100 gift card.
Just a brief sidebar here to our listeners. Perhaps you've wanted to recruit someone to your staff team but aren't sure how to broach the topic of support raising without either scaring them away or shoving a full copy of the God Ask book into their hands. So, wouldn't you like an 8-page booklet that might calm their fears and quickly unpack the basic how-tos from a practical and biblical perspective? We actually have a booklet like that. It's called The 5 Keys to Support Raising, and you can get these booklets in English or in Spanish at cmmpress.org. You'll receive an additional 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast.
Well, that's one of the things I appreciate
Yeah.
even about what little you have shared with me is that I don't sense any bitterness from you at all. Nothing but love for your parents, even though, yeah, there was some baggage from growing up, and even some of your thought life and spiritual life and things like that that you indicated in the boot camp as far as how you were processing things. So with that, though, you said that you were kind of picking up secondhand stress about money from your parents all the time. Did
Mhm.
did you feel like their funding was like? Did it ever kind of get to a place where it was healthy, or is it more of when it did, it was only temporary?
That is a good question. I haven't thought about that one much. Um, I think it was kind of I don't know, seasonal or cyclical.
Okay.
There were times of more stress and times of less. I think I never got the feeling that we were gonna starve or that we were gonna go cold or hungry. My parents did a good job of making sure that they talked in a way that really made us feel that God is going to take care of us and he will always give us what we need. That's actually one of the yays. Like that's one of the big things I celebrate, and I'm grateful to
Yeah.
them for that support raising journey, because I always saw God's provision
Mm-hmm.
in really cool and clear ways. It's so tangible when you're a kid, and God's taking care of you. And even to this day, I never struggle with trusting God to give me what I need, and I really attribute that to
Oh, praise the Lord.
happen before my eyes. So that's, I mean, that, to add a positive to the negative,
Right.
there's always that too.
Well, so
Um,
that was the yays, but I do get to
yeah,
kind of hold them back on sharing some of the nays. So I know that it's not an attack on your parents, and yet why don't you go ahead and dig in on that a little bit and tell us a little bit more about the nays?
So there's about the three other main impacts that it had throughout my childhood, and then kind of trickling into my adult years. Was feeling like you're regularly put on display.
Mm.
So there's the stress about money that you feel like you share, because you're kind of in a shared ministry as a family.
Sure.
It's not just dad going to work; you're all kind of there, especially on the mission field. Maybe not so much home ministry, but especially on the mission field, you're a team.
Right.
So you share the joys, but you also share the stresses. But also being put on display was probably the hardest part. And that was just the norm. It kind of still is, for families to tour around together, to show up at churches together. And we would all wear our native, African outfits to church, and stand up in front of everybody on stage a couple times, and like stand at the table afterwards to get newsletter signups, and us kids kind of answered questions, and it was just this feeling of just make sure you're perfect. And again, this is interesting because my parents never said that out loud. They would never say, oh, you have to be perfect.
No.
You have to smile. You have to be nice to all the strangers, because our livelihood depends on this, or like our money, where our money is coming from, depends on you being good and perfect. But regardless, my sister and I picked that message up real quick. So, which is it's just another reminder that, kids pick up so much more than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
They're really good at observing and picking up those cues.
So it's kind of an unspoken pressure to perform. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Kind of unspoken pressure. I mean, it wasn't totally unspoken, because obviously, I mean, you were being, you were kids. You do what your parents tell you to do. But there wasn't it wasn't a you better be perfect, Anna. But somewhere in there, you began to feel like I better be perfect. And it depends on me.
Absolutely. So, and that was for missionary kids that we work with, and all missionary kids and a lot of ministry kids, identity and struggling with identity is huge. It's a huge part of our struggle. And it really just messes with us even more to have that piece of your identity be so big of performing and being on display.
Especially mixing the fact that you're just a third culture kid anyway. Third culture kids are you're kind of your family of origins one culture, but you're growing up in a different culture. And the reality is you're not one or the other. You're your own third culture.
Yep, absolutely. And the enemy is he knows that about TCKs. So any part of our identity where those cracks start to appear, it's really easy to get in there with those lies. And so the lie that you will not be loved if you're not perfect, you will not be accepted, you're not useful, you're not useful for the kingdom if you're not perfect, if you're not happy, kind of that that song Jesus Wants You for a Sunbeam.
Yes.
It's a really sweet song, but in that context, when you're already hearing those lies and feeling that pressure, it can really get twisted into a legalistic, performance-based faith.
Right.
So Jesus doesn't want to see all my pain or my yucks, or the fact that I'm at church right now, standing in a native outfit and headscarf. But you know what? I really miss Senegal. I really don't want to stand in front of strangers for one more day. I really just want to be myself at church, but I'm in the house of God and I feel like I have to be somebody else, or I have to hide this homesickness or this sadness.
Then it almost turns into, I don't know if you knew this, but there was a negative cover of that song by Nirvana called Jesus Doesn't Want Me for a Sunbeam.
Oh man.
So it almost kind of turns into that, doesn't it? Or at least in your head.
Yeah, exactly. Just be a sunbeam. Don't be a rain cloud. Like, nobody wants to see that. That's not how you're supposed to be at church. That's not what Jesus wants to see. So it's, and I've talked to a lot of other adult missionary kids who just struggled with that same identity crisis of like, wait, how fake do I have to be to get people to love me? But not only that, to get God's approval. So it messed with that turned into also messing with my idea of what is church for? Because then now I have this concept of, oh, church is for performing, church is for being perfect, and that up until last year, even as an adult, I still struggled so much with feeling this anxiety every time I would walk into a church where I feel like, oh my goodness, okay, I have to turn on my smiley face. I have to hide all my yucks, and I have to start performing every time I walk into a church.
Mm.
So that was one of the one of the sad things that I still kind of struggle with. And I never forget being a teenager and just hiding in one of the church's bathrooms
Oh, really?
trying to get my panic attack under control, because I knew that I had to be under control as soon as I left the bathroom, as soon as I walked out. And because the thought is everyone is always looking at you. They're watching you, they're judging you.
Right.
Because you have to be this perfect missionary kid that they expect you to be.
Well, first of all, I mean, I know this is part of your story and we're not like going all the way back, but I'm sorry. I really am sorry you felt that way. That's heavy. It's hard enough to be a teenager. You know? That I know that God allowed that, and I know it's matured you, and obviously you've used it a lot for good, but I still just can't imagine how hard that must have been for you. So I thank you for sharing that difficult thing, and I am sorry about it. I apologize. I interrupted. I know you have other things to share, but I wanted to pause you and know that not just myself, I'm sure people listening to this over the podcast our hearts are with you. And I don't think we'd want that for you, but thank you for just being vulnerable about that.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, I'm honestly, it's a gift to have someone listen, and thank you for apologizing, even though you didn't need to. It helps to be heard. It's really wonderful to have someone hear your story. So thank you. So I mentioned already a little bit before about how I believed I needed to perform to earn love and to earn Christ's love, God's love. And I realized pretty much 2 years ago that I was still stuck in that pattern from childhood of performing for others' love and performing for God's love, and still really never believing truly in my heart that He loves me just as much even on my worst day. For a missionary kid, this is just so hard to come to grips with. And especially for me, the enemy had really gotten that lie sunk deep in my heart. And in turn, I also kind of started to believe it about how I was saved, that I was only, I'm only saved on my good days. I'm only saved on the days that, I'm perfect and I do everything right. And I just had not realized how deep that lie had sunk into my understanding of Christ and the gospel and Christianity. And turned it into something really, really terrible and legalistic and a burden.
Wow. So your kind of your sense of identity for sure, but also even your eternal security, your dependence upon God, all that just kind of got twisted up into the make sure I do this right and be perfect. It's a trap again.
It's totally a trap. And I fell for it. And praise God, I was able to be released from that 2 years ago. I mean, as an adult, it took so long, but He finally opened my eyes and let me see what I was putting my faith in, and what I was putting my trust in was my own perfection and my own works. And that had just seeped into all my relationships. And I really had to stop and do a check-in on all my relationships and really figure out what I was trying to get out of them, and what I was putting into them, and the whole basis for even my relationship with my husband. So it was really a sweet year of figuring that out, and I'm grateful that God helped me do it. So
yeah. What's interesting too is I'm thankful even in the midst of your pain. I am sorry for your pain and the difficulty of that, but you're still tracking with God. Not that everything was perfect, because, hey, shocker, you're never perfect anyway. None of us are. but that God was continuing to pursue you, and you still had some relationship with him for sure, even though there was kind of a chasm or a room or something else that you had really still needed to open up and turn over to him.
Yeah. It's amazing. God is so faithful. He never gives up on us. And I get to use this story that I have, all my yays and yucks from growing up overseas. I get to use it every time we train missionary kids and families now. God uses the beautiful and the broken parts. And it's an honor.
Yeah. And that's a good segue. So going back a few months, we're in Colorado Springs. We're doing a Support Raising Solutions boot camp, and you're sitting at a back table. I don't know that you and I had ever had a conversation, just one-to-one, but there were 70 or 80 people in the room, and somebody, it wasn't you, somebody asked me a question in one of our Q&A times, and just kind of talked about kids, and I don't even remember what the exact question is. I'm sure you might, but they essentially were saying, hey, do our kids have to be there? Do our kids not have to be there? Our kids, is it strategic? Is it not? Do we make them because they're going to be part of it anyway? It was something along those lines. And to be honest, Anna, I don't even remember what exactly I answered, because I don't remember the question. But I know what I typically would say, but that being said, you had like a response that was from the back row. It I don't know. It's like you took like this huge breath, and all of a sudden your table, I don't know. It's just, there's this energy coming out of the back of the room, and you stood up and in tears began thanking me for addressing what it was we had just said. And it was an intimate moment for everybody in the room. I mean, everybody was just kind of drawn in. So you're going to have to fill in some gaps, because my brain isn't that great sometimes. What happened?
Oh, man. So I, funny thing, that moment is not very clear to me either. Although some of my friends helped fill in the blanks.
Okay.
Because I think I vaguely remember the question, I believe, was, should I bring my kids on support raising appointments? Because we were talking about the calendar, I believe, at that point, and talking about, okay, what commitments can you move around? What things can you drop? What things can you prioritize so you make more time for support raising?
Sure.
And obviously, some of these things that we're prioritizing and moving around are family time, date nights. Okay, what do I do with my kids?
Right.
And so that was a really valid question. Okay, going on a support raising appointment. No, mom's not there to watch the kids. Do I take them along?
Okay.
So yeah, I'm actually curious what your answer was to that, because I can't even remember what your perspective on that was.
Well, I don't think everybody's a huge fan of my answer, so let me just throw that out there. But it's the same reason that we don't typically, we just don't allow kids at the boot camp. And it's not that we don't love kids. We totally love kids. They're wonderful. I have 4 of my own. They will all tell you I love them. But within that, so frequently, kids are a distraction from having a good, serious conversation with someone. That doesn't mean that kids are always distractions and they can never have good conversations. But for the context of having, 20 minutes or so for a conversation / presentation where you invite somebody to be a part of your team for the sake of the kingdom, a real vision driven, you have a story of a changed life, all the components that we train at the boot camps to having a great presentation. It's just hard if kids are in the room. And it's not because kids are bad necessarily. It's because they're distracting. It's because, it can turn into something where you're like, hey, sit there and be quiet. I'm being serious. Well, that's a really hard thing to ask some kids. Yeah. I'm not saying it's impossible, but hey, sit there and be quiet and look good and, say please, say thank you, mind all your P's and Q's, and just sit there and watch daddy talk for the next 30 to 60 minutes. That's kind of hard on kids. But also if there's other kids, there's interruptions. And I might have even shared, I have a family that I love. They're on our support team. Absolutely love them. But they always ask, whenever we connect with them, they always ask me to bring my daughter. And I said, in that situation, absolutely. They have a daughter the same age as my daughter. They have so much fun laughing and playing. And yeah, they might interrupt us a couple times, but it's not a big deal. Also, my daughter's 16. That's a little different from 3, right? So basically I said, hey, let the kids be the kids, but by the same token, don't feel like you have to drag your kids along every time, and don't make your kids feel like they have to be dragged along every time. There's exceptions to the rules, but generally speaking, you want to be able to have a great support raising conversation / presentation that invites people in, and your kids probably don't need to be in the room most of the time. So I think I said something along those lines.
Yeah, that rings a bell. Yeah, I think you said something along those lines, and you're honestly, I agree for all the reasons that you just stated. Absolutely, especially if they're 3 or 4. It's way too much to ask them to stop being a kid for an hour here. You said.
And that doesn't mean we're saying that families should never bring their kids, particularly if you're speaking at a church. I mean, I've done that, and I think a lot of people have, and we're not ripping on your parents, Anna, for having brought you along. We're not saying they shouldn't have done that, but also we want families to be aware of just kind of what could be going on in your kid's head, and helping them understand, where our hope and faith lies, and whether or not a church or a supporter partners with us is not completely dependent on how perfect they can be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. I completely agree. And not just because of the distraction factor, but also knowing what's going on in their hearts, having that conversation, and being able to continually keep the lines of communication open so you can keep having that conversation at every developmental level.
Yeah. By the way, I'll share this. So once a year, my family does a thank you for our supporters, where we do some baking and we send it out and stuff like that. And I'm always trying to be mindful of, what are my kids learning in all of this? Like, for instance, my youngest, he knows that he's going to do the least he can, and he hopes to end up outside playing catch with kids, right? There's always these things going on, because we invite some of our friends to help us with this big baking process we do. But it's so important that when we gather, we don't just jump into the baking process, but we stop and really cast a vision for not just my family, but certainly my kids and those that are joining us. It's like, hey, we're doing this simply because we're thankful. We're thankful for the partnership in the gospel we get with other families like our families. And we're doing this to serve them. They don't require it. They're not going to probably stop supporting us if we don't do this. That's not our motivation. We're doing it as a motivation because God has provided. This is his conduit that he's provided through, and we like to say thank you. And it's a good posture for our hearts to be in. And it's actually kind of fun to do our little baking thing for a few hours once a year. And that's such a simple thing that we can do. Now, I say it's simple. It takes all sorts of runs to Sam's Club and buy groceries, and we have to use a church kitchen that has convection ovens, so we can do we can get it done 5 times faster and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, MPD does teach our kids something. It does teach them something, and it might be a good thing, but if we're not careful, it could also be an unhealthy thing.
You need to. I love how you do that, because you're framing it for them, because they could take many meanings out of that, but you are giving them the meaning. You are framing that experience for them with truth, and I love the gratitude angle. It's that is such a great learning moment for you, and you're inviting them all to participate as a like all the kids can do that. It's not just like, oh, we're writing thank you notes. Well, the 4-year-old can't really do that. What's he gonna do? But you're participating as a family, but it's a practice of gratitude.
Yeah.
It's not performing. You're not putting each other or your family on display. You're practicing gratitude, and that is healthy at every developmental level. And it's such a key to resiliency in ministry, and you're teaching them that. So I hope you hear me applauding you.
Oh, well, that wasn't my goal, but thank you. I appreciate that. I just know that I don't want my kids feeling how you sometimes felt. And I'm sorry you felt that way sometimes. But, I don't know that we can completely, keep our kids cocooned and in a bubble and away from bad feelings. I think that's impossible. We live in a sinful world surrounded by sinful people, and we're all born sinners. So that's not going to happen. But how we process things, particularly when it comes to ministry partner development and support raising, how we process that, I think as parents, we need to be very aware that it's not just, our kids show up and they play a tiny part here and there, but they have feelings, they have thoughts, they have perceptions. And part of leading our ministries well is first leading our families well and being cognizant of what they might be going through. So anyway, well, Anna, thank you again. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for just being even opening up and sharing a little bit more about that that moment. That's funny you don't remember it that well, because I'm telling you, you were the star of the show for a minute.
Oh man!
Everybody was looking at you, so I hope you were being perfect, Anna.
I know. I think I said a tiny bit of perfect. I think I said a tiny bit of what I shared. But man, yeah, the moment is so blurry. I think I must have been feeling very intense emotions.
Yeah.
I just blanked out on what I just said. So I'm glad it touched people, and I'm glad God used it.
Yeah, I think he did because we really did unpack, kind of like what we did on this podcast. Probably not as quite as much time, but we did unpack this discussion, and I think it was apropos. And I'm sure it wasn't just you in the room that day that really needed to hear that. So, well, listen, before we go, I want to give you the last word or last words, if it is. Can you maybe share some tips for families that are in that MPD? They're in that realm. Maybe they've never been fully funded. Maybe they haven't even had training yet. I know that you probably say get to an SRS boot camp, but above and beyond that, what tips would you have for parents that have families that are raising and living off support?
Thanks for asking. We at MTI, we love working with families, and so we actually we have a lot to say on this, so I'm going to try to keep it short.
Well, I mean, if it takes you a few minutes, go for it. And people, they can always, I suppose, listen to the podcast a little faster if they want to adjust the settings, but we're not in a rush. So if you have more than just a couple, please go for it. We don't have to end it right away.
So one of the things that we specialize in at MTI is training not just adults for the mission field during the 4 weeks they're here, but also training the kids and training the family as a whole. So I teach the kids the exact same things the adults are learning upstairs about language acquisition and how do you learn a culture and how do you grieve and how do you say goodbye, but then also how do you learn a new language? So they're getting the same stuff, same vocabulary, and they're learning as a family. And it's really sweet, but a lot of times when we see families coming to us right before they go on the field, it's often at the end of a huge marathon of support raising. So we actually, you get them at the beginning and we actually get them at the end, which is a very unique perspective that I'm realizing that we have.
Yeah, it's a partnership, right?
It's a partnership. And oh man, and by the way, I do want to say I'm so grateful for what you do. I want to take just a moment to say thank you because the SRS Bootcamp really helped me personally. And I highly recommend it to anyone considering raising support. Just want to put that out there.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Aaron. But yeah, often whether they've gotten good support raising training or not, they come to us completely toast. They are at different, some are fairly healthy, most are not. They are exhausted. They are sometimes wrecked, honestly, by 6 months to a year of support, and not just support raising. That's part of it, but they have also been selling houses. They have been moving. They have been getting visas, planning. They have been saying goodbye. Some people come to us after a year of living in their grandparents' basement. Because for the families going overseas, that whole year before they go overseas can just be one huge ball of stress. And support raising is just like, for some of them, unfortunately, one more stressor added into that mix. And what we see is they have often come apart as a family. And we see them, a lot of marriages coming to us that have been just cracked wide open by this year of stress. A lot of them coming to us needing counseling, and a lot of parents who have lost sight of their kids. And again, before this process, these families might have seemed perfectly healthy from the outside, but this process really breaks it down.
Wait a minute, they're Christian workers. They're perfect, aren't they? I mean, they're missionaries.
They're missionaries.
Jesus 2.0. Come on.
So what we end up having to do is pick up the pieces here at MTI for 4 weeks for a lot of these families. Wow. And some of them don't know how bad it is until they get here. And then they finally stop and they take a breath, and it's like they've been sprinting for a year, and they finally stop and drink some water and lie down and rest. And when they look around themselves, they realize how far they've gone off the track. So it's one of those things where I do want to just put a warning out there that this time is a time when your family is going to be under attack, because he doesn't want you to join the mission field. He doesn't want you to go. He doesn't want you to go into that home ministry that you're looking at, or go overseas to Uganda. So he's going to attack your family. He's going to attack your marriages and your kids.
And your health and all sorts of things.
And that's not, and of course your personal life with God, but that is just one of the many places that are vulnerable during this time. And this is not to scare people, but to prepare people for this reality. So what we say it's better to get your family onto the field healthy than it is to get them there fast. Especially just seeing what we've seen. If your family is not healthy when you get on there, it's only going to get worse. The stress is not going to stop. The first 2 years especially are going to be especially stressful.
By the way, I wish you were wrong, Anna. I wish you were wrong, but one of the reasons that you get to do what you do is because, unfortunately, you're so right. It's such an issue.
Yeah. So that season of support raising, when we look at that calendar, and how you block out your time, we wish we could kind of get a hold of these families right before they start and tell them to make sure, please prioritize your family as your first ministry, even during this support raising time. Start those healthy rhythms. Say a good no so you can say the best yes. And don't.
You said a great thing there. I'm sorry. I want to interrupt you really quick. I apologize for interrupting. Yeah, your family is your first ministry. I imagine there might be somebody going, no, wait a minute, and hold on. So I'm just going to affirm what you said. Number one, though, we're talking about ministry there. We're talking about priorities. Your first priority is your personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Your second priority, and I'm assuming you're personally healthy, and that came out of your first priority. But your second, it is your spouse. It is your family. That's your ministry, though. That is your most important ministry. It's more important than wherever in the world you've been called to go or whatever role you're called to serve in. Your first ministry is to your family. So I'm just affirming what you said, but also clarifying in case somebody was like, now hold on. So I'm sorry, continue.
Thank you. Yeah, because a lot of people coming to us have not heard that no one has told them this explicitly. They're like, okay, we're going to have to start sacrificing all kinds of things if we're going to be in ministry. We got to tighten our belts. And that, while that is true, family should never be one of those things. Your marriage should never be one of those things. So for marriages, we see a lot of wives and husbands who have given up date nights. And it seems obviously to the outside like, oh, like that's fine for a month or two, but it's amazing for 6 months, the damage that can do. And it's especially if you're in a situation like living in grandparents' basement, your marriage is under fire. So
you say that like it's a bad thing.
Hey, grandparents' basements, they could be so cushy and spacious and so much. But
it elicits a musty smell in my brain somehow. I'm not sure how, but
again, like you said, your personal relationship with God, your personal health, and then your marriage. If you have kids, your marriage is that foundation. And if your marriage is under fire, then it's gonna be that much harder to parent. And all that is going to be trickling down. So I was looking at that calendar and thinking about these families and trying to think, okay, if I was going overseas, how would I do this? How would I do the support raising season right before we go overseas in a way that still honors my marriage, in a way that still means that I have quality time with my kids? Because the truth is you might need even more than normal because your family's going through transition. And the temptation is to get tunnel vision, and you stop seeing your kids, you stop seeing your wife or your husband. But we actually need to do the opposite of that and see them more, because they're going through just as much stress as we are, and they need a father, they need a mother at that point more than ever. So it's a challenge to everyone looking at that calendar right before they start their support raising season. Mm-hmm. How to make sure you prioritize that, and whatever you do, don't X out date night. Don't X out daddy-daughter dates or father-son or mother-son dates. Somehow that needs to. God will take care of you without you having to cross those out, even though it may be hard to figure out a way, because you just don't want to wreck that or jeopardize that before you enter ministry, because it's not going to get any easier. Mm-hmm. The other thing we really recommend is conversations at the beginning, during, and at the end of support raising, and check-ins during the support raising journey with your spouse and your kids at their varying developmental levels. We already mentioned that, just constantly just checking in. How are you perceiving this? How are you processing this? Our church visits or supporter visits, selling our house, anything that's part of that transition. And that's where the date nights and the daddy-daughter dates and the one-on-ones really come into their own, because that's where those conversations happen. Even if you have to do it in a car ride, right. they're so important. And the missionary kids who are adults now that I talk to, who remember a positive experience with support raising, mostly it's because their parents kept open communication with them, and they discussed it together as a family, and they decided.
You can pray about stuff. You can pray, hey, pray for my meeting, pray that they listen well, pray that God calls them, pray that they say yes. And by the way, even if they say no, it's okay. We're not ruined as a family. Because kids have sometimes sometimes rational, sometimes irrational fears, and they need to know they're a part of what's going on, even if you don't necessarily take them to every single meeting.
Absolutely. Yes. I love that. Asking your kids to pray for you. That's a sweet way to do that. And then the last thing is planning a family time or vacation for at least a week at the end of your support raising. Schedule it at the beginning so it doesn't get put off, because we have a lot of families coming to us that are like, okay, we did our support raising, we did our training, and we're like leaving for the field like 3 days after we finish this training, and it's just, there is no space. There is no space for breath. There is no space for Sabbath in that, which is another really important key to family health and spiritual health. But of course, and that extent, you're heading for a wreck if you don't plan in some kind of downtime. I mean, if you only have a weekend, at least that, but a week is ideal. A week is long enough to come down from that stress of transition and really, again, start to see each other. Turning the eyes of the fathers back to their children, and the hearts of the children back to their parents before you start the journey of ministry in earnest as a family.
Yeah. A lot of wisdom there.
Yeah.
Was that I mean, that's quite a lot right there. Was that your?
That was it. I know, that was. I told you.
That was great though. I don't know which one of those I would tell you to skip.
Yeah, that was. I tried. That was the main points. The things that we've seen. Families who do this are healthier. Families who do this are resilient, and they make it, and they last on the field. They last in ministry.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord. It's totally possible. It's totally doable. I hope that gives anyone out there listening hope, and also determination.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great word there, and there's just obviously there is so much more to people's motivation for ministry than raising support. In fact, sometimes that's not their motivation at all. They find that that's this whole sanctifying process as a part of it. But I'm glad to just hear how you tie that into their overall preparedness for really thriving as a family, because we don't just want to equip people to get to the field. We want them to survive and thrive in whatever context they're called to, whether that's globally or within the United States. We don't want one-hit wonders. We want people that God's going to continue to use for, if He wills it, a lifetime of service and ministry.
Absolutely. Amen.
Well, Anna, it's been a pleasure. I don't feel like we've wasted any time today, even though this might have been one of our longer podcasts. I think it's been excellent, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and share some of what you get to do, as well as your personal story. So just want to say thank you again, and God bless you, and appreciate you being on the SRS podcast with me today.
Thank you so much, Aaron. God bless you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.